Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, as I was reading through the information, I had to double check because I thought it said LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund, but I believe the President should have requested a name change with the fund to change it to LWAF, Land and Water Acquisition Fund, because that seems to be where the bulk of this funding would go to, is acquisitions. And as we talk about conservation and we think about the original purpose of LWCF, the definition of conservation is planned management of a natural resource to prevent exploitation, destruction, or neglect. And we talk about stewardship a lot, and stewardship is just the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. I know there's been discussion about Mr. Pinchot today, and I was fortunate to study forestry at a school that he founded, and one thing they taught us there was that no management is management. Forests are dynamic, they're always changing, and if we can say we're not going to manage them, we're going to leave them to nature, but nature manages forests, and one of the main tools the main tool that nature uses is fire. But we get into a scenario where we decide to let nature manage the forest, and they start burning, and the first thing we do is we go put out the fire. So we spend a lot of money fighting against nature when we could actively manage and make the forest more healthy and productive in many different ways, not only for hunting and recreation, but for timber production, for biodiversity, greatly improve wildlife habitat. And when I look at LWCF in my state of Arkansas, it's actually had some positive success in the past, even on the acquisition side. But I will say that the acquisitions that were made were where we had fragmentation in the national forest. We worked with landowners to not just buy new land, but to trade land from the private sector to the public sector, so that both the private sector and the public sector had a more contiguous landscape. We didn't add to the total amount of land in the national forest. There are other benefits that come from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, but I'll go back to the gentlelady's comment from Wyoming that those were when we were getting more of a 60% designation to the states with matching funds from the state. Now, and I will also say in my state, the prime hunting areas are on state lands. Not that we couldn't have great hunting and recreation on some of the Fish and Wildlife Service lands or on the Forest Service, but what I'm hearing from my constituents is that those lands aren't being managed. It's hard to duck hunt in a fish and wildlife area that is not flooded. They're not denied access. There's just no ducks there because the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't flood the timber, and that's why the land was first set aside, was to be flooded for a green timber refuge. I hear about on the national forest where roads are being closed, access denied, and certain types of hunting are not allowed. So it doesn't seem to make sense to me that we would spend money to acquire new lands when we've got, if you add it all up across the agencies, $13.8 billion of maintenance backlog. We're not conserving and taking care of the assets that we have, but we're treating our assets like they're disposable. We'll just leave these and go acquire more, and we're not really being good stewards of what we have. So I would like to ask Mr. Regan, what is the best way to counteract this trend that we've seen?
Well, as I've said in my testimony, I think that reforming the LWCF is a good first step. I think, as you say, there are a lot of needs on our existing lands, and finding ways, a dedicated funding source like the LWCF, which is, as has been mentioned, is not taxpayer dollars, but could be dedicated to addressing something like the deferred maintenance backlog, I think is a great start. The reality is that tax dollars have proven ineffective at addressing that backlog, which has grown increasingly in the past few decades, despite efforts by several different administrations to address it. So I think this is a great conversation to have. The reauthorization presents Congress with an opportunity have this discussion about how we address these needs, and as I mentioned, they're great needs. There are lots of projects on our existing federal lands that need our attention, and they need our attention soon.
Thank you.